I cannot help but wonder if Jurrion Dickey's a transfer candidate.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. The wide receiver room, it's going to be great. I think it is going to be great. Again, shout out Junior Adams. Ross Douglas has been left a fully stocked cupboard. And the perfect transfer move for Oregon basketball is available. My fingers are so incredibly crossed. Not just on that, but that Jurrion Dickey doesn't transfer. I really don't want him to. Want to make that incredibly clear. But this is something that has popped in my mind for a second straight year. Not after his first season because, we learned after the 2023 year that, he'd been injured and he wasn't quite at 100% and whatnot. And, 2024 was really his first year. And I have not read or heard anything about him dealing with an injury last season, but this is a former five-star receiver who has amassed 2 catches for 14 yards in 2 seasons. Slice and dice it however way you want. That's not what a lot of us envisioned when he was recruited to Oregon. And I think one of the reasons that I really want him to stick around, find a role with the Ducks, and be an impact player in the wide receiver room is that he is really an Oregon guy. He moved, I think, his senior year of high school from, I think he was Valley Christian and then went somewhere further down south. But he was originally recruited by the Cristobal administration. And then when Lanning and company came in, stuck with the Ducks. I think that's one of the reasons that in my head, and I think a lot of your heads as well, you think about Jurrion Dickey and say, I don't want him to leave. I don't think that, we're all sitting around going, yeah, no, he can leave. Whatever. Like, no, I really want him to stay because in today's world of college football, it's just not as common. However, this wouldn't be the craziest transfer in the world. Now, I have not read or heard anything regarding this, and I just think it's a possibility given the way the wide receiver room looks, which I'll talk about more later on today's show. So this question came in, which you can always send in as well. YouTube comments, Twitter, all that good stuff from Coastal Bend Fish Ninja. Spencer, interesting question for you. Does Jurrion Dickey hit the spring portal if he isn't lining up to start or be a big contributor this year? I know he was injured in year 1, but there was still a bit of hype about him being a beast. Fact check true. Then almost nothing in 2024. No mention of injury, but didn't play. I'm sure he redshirted his freshman year. He did. But would he really burn a second year of 4 possible in an extremely deep room and not get a lot of run? I guess if 3 of the biggest contributors this year are Gary Bryant Jr., Malik Benson, and Evan Stewart, all 3 of those dudes are seniors and gone next year. So beyond DeCorey and Moore, we would need 3 or more new high-end contributors in 26. Does that help with the deep wide receiver room from suffering portal losses? I don't know about guys. It's hard to say without having an understanding or really any data points at all because practice access is so limited for those guys that are on the ground covering it. Until we see the spring game, it's hard to know what the gap really is between the guys at the top of the receiver room and the guys that are fighting their way up the depth chart. But this is an incredibly stacked position group. I think it's every bit as deep and interesting as the secondary. Maybe just slightly less interesting because I have a better idea of who the key contributors are going to be on the receiver side of things than the secondary. But still, there are a lot of question marks all over the place. But for a guy who has Jurrion Dickey's talent, he certainly could go to another school and play a lot more. Something to consider, and I've heard this multiple times, his younger brother, who is on the team and is not someone who I ever expect to have a big career with the Ducks, I have heard more than once that connection is really, really tight and could be one of the reasons that he doesn't wind up hitting the portal. Because I think you can really easily paint a picture in your head and it could come to fruition where a guy of his caliber looks at the receiver room, says they brought in another transfer. There are a bunch of other guys here. I'm not working my way up as quickly as I thought I would coming out of high school. I'd like to go elsewhere. I mean, you had guys that were not as talented as him, not wait as long. Think about someone who I heard is in the portal the other day. Ashton Kozar was a 4-star receiver, I believe, in the 2023 or 24 class. He spent 1 year at the Ducks and said, nope, I'm out. Like, that guy was a high-end speed sort of dude. I think he needed some work in the actual receiving skills area. But again, guys have looked at this receiver room and the way it's been recruited in the last several years and said, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and try and fight for playing time for the next several seasons because it's just going to be difficult. And, Jurrion Dickey going into his redshirt sophomore campaign, not having had any meaningful snaps contributed to Oregon at this point is not something any of us would have predicted at the time of his recruitment. He was originally a 4-star guy, committed to Oregon, and then he kept trending up and got a 5th star because he was just having that much of a butt-kicking season. Like, he was just incredibly good. And I actually remember seeing him many moons ago when I was a student broadcaster at Santa Clara. We did some local high school football. He caught like a 50-yard Hail Mary at the end of halftime as a true freshman playing on varsity. I mean, the ball was just thrown into a crowd, and all of a sudden he came down with it. And I remember that call very specifically. I think I said Jurrion Dickey, the man on the spot. And then when he came around and he was, still showing an interest in Oregon, I thought, wow, that was kind of a crazy connection point. But anyway, I digress. So I think there is a world where he could leave. I wonder about the brother connection and the fact that he stayed loyal to Oregon this long. Number one, you look at a guy like Micah Hudson at Texas Tech, didn't play a lot as a true freshman, a 5-star over there. He transferred to Texas A&M, and he's now back in the transfer portal and, trying to find another spot. Jurrion Dickey doesn't appear to be that sort of guy where he wants to play the portal game and, find the musical chairs role where it suits him best. I don't think that that's the kind of guy he is based on the one conversation I had with him a couple of years ago before he committed to Oregon and what I've heard about him as well. So I think he is definitely a candidate. I think anybody in the receiver room, I've been thinking about the O-line. I don't know that the O-line will have anybody transfer out. They could. I don't think anybody important would, though. But certainly Jurrion Dickey, I think, is the biggest name that would pop into people's minds just because this receiver room, as I'll talk about later on the show, is incredibly talented and is incredibly veteran. Before I get to that, got this question that came in from Rick over on Twitter, who said, what are your thoughts on the Oregon Carlos Loughlin lawsuits? Can you simplify it? We don't really ever see this. P.S. Love the show. Well, Rick, I appreciate that. I don't really have a big takeaway here. Essentially, what's happened, according to James Crepea of the Oregonian, who had the first report that I saw in the matter, essentially there's a dispute between Oregon and Loughlin and how much was owed to the school when, his buyout was paid because he, signed a contract to be with Oregon. And when you're a coach and you go elsewhere before your contract is over, that new school then has to pay the buyout. And there's a dispute of a couple $100,000. Honestly, don't have a big reaction to that. I don't think that's going to become some huge, big story. I don't think Carlos Loughlin is suddenly the worst running back coach in the history of humanity just because of all this. Like, I don't know, man. It's college sports. I've seen a lot crazier things. Nico's leaving Tennessee, for goodness sake, and doesn't yet have a home at the time I'm recording this show. Like, there are just wilder things out there. I'm sure it'll get resolved. I don't think anyone's going to really look bad either way. I think my only real takeaway is it shuts the door on any one-day potential return for Carlos Loughlin coming back to Oregon. Like, I think we can put that notion to bed. Not that it was ever necessarily out there, but that's the only definitive conclusion. This is just one of those things. It happens I don't know how to categorize it. I'm just saying, as someone who works in college athletics, I'm not surprised this sort of thing has popped up before. I'd be surprised if it's the first time it's ever popped up within Oregon football before. So, no, not a huge takeaway there. Let me know your thoughts about Jurrion Dickey, though, in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all that good jazz. It's going to be hard for him to play. It just is going to be hard to see the field because of how good the Oregon receiver room is going to be again. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed. As easily as you stream your favorite shows, it's gaming made simple and it's all on your Fire TV. And let me tell you, there's nothing like ease and consolidation in today's world of streaming, and it's all over here. Everything's all over the place. You can have it all in one spot. Plus, EA Sports College Football 25, amazing game. I do have a buddy who helped design that game. But The latest technology is elevated playing. That's with Wi-Fi 6 and 6E and auto low latency mode. Advanced technology, Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smoother, more responsive gameplay with lightning fast speeds you need to stay competitive. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Check them out with Amazon Fire TV. See that second segment sip from a Locked On mug. Locked On mug. No, you cannot have one. Anyway. Speaking of that wide receiver room, it's loaded. It is absolutely, positively loaded. I will get to every position group, and I've already hit a couple, and I will hit more next week. Leading up to the spring game, I'll have thoughts coming out of that game as well. Absolutely stoked about it. So, the amount of talent in this room just continues to be a historic level of depth. If you compare, I should have done this before today's show, but if you compare the 2018 Oregon wide receiver room to this wide receiver room, it is a completely different program at the position. You cannot overstate the job that Junior Adams, now at the Dallas Cowboys, has done with this position group. And that leaves some pretty big shoes to fill for Ross Douglas, but the cupboards have been well stocked for his arrival. So, also, by the way, might talk about this more next week if he's still in the portal, but Syracuse's top receiver, Trebor Pena, I believe is his name, not interested, and here's why. The wide receiver room consists, for scholarship players, DeCorian Moore, Gary Bryant Jr., Kyler Casper, Malik Benson, Evan Stewart, Jeremiah McLaughlin, Jurrion Dickey, Justice Lowe, Cooper Perry, Dylan Gresham, Jack Ressler. A lot of guys. They're not all going to see the field. The most action they might see this year could be in the spring game. One of the many reasons that spring games are so much fun. So when I lay out who I expect to start, I'm thinking 4 receivers as kind of your quote-unquote starting bunch that'll be your most snapped. And it's technically 3. Like if you were to think of it in terms of lining up on the field, just in base 11 personnel, 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers, you could see it that way. I'm going to go 4 just because I think without a serious secondary receiving threat at tight end the way Oregon had last year, I think you're going to see a 4th receiver more heavily involved. But we've also seen typically 4 receivers play a significant role of some kind over the last couple of years for the Ducks. So I going into the spring game, Evan Stewart is absolutely one of your starting receivers. No question there. I don't know what my expectations are. He's grown on me a little bit as I've thought about him, talked to other guys about Malik Benson, the Florida State transfer, who was at Alabama before that, who was in the JUCO ranks before that. Guy super experienced. Guy has not had a big season yet at the Power 4 level, but I think that's someone they bring in and expect to start right away. Evan Stewart, Malik Benson. I'm putting Gary Bryant Jr. in there as one of the starters to begin the year. We'll see what DeCorian does in the spring game. He's definitely the guy I'm most excited to watch. And then 4th receiver, Justice Lowe, which is what he actually was a year ago. The leading receivers for Oregon last year were Tez Johnson and then Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden, Terrence Ferguson, Kenyon Sadiq, Jordan James, and then Justice Lowe. So I think your first 4 are Stewart, Benson, Bryant, and Lowe. I think your second 4 most likely are DeCorian Moore, Jeremiah McLaughlin going into his second year, and I liked what he showed in the spring game a year ago. And I think you'll have Jurrion Dickey and Kyler Casper in there. So, going back to the Jurrion discussion for a moment, is that something he'd be okay with? Or is he able to take somebody's spot? Because last year, Justice Lowe, who's far more experienced than Jurrion Dickey, not just in time spent in college, but number of healthy years spent in college, Lowe was clearly ahead of Jurrion Dickey a year ago. Because Jurrion, based on what we've been told, was not hurt at all. But who stepped up when, Trayshawn Holden was out because of the spitting incident against Ohio State? Who stepped up when Tez Johnson was out? It was Justice Lowe, and I thought he did a good job. Or in the Rose Bowl when Evan Stewart went out with an injury. It was Justice Lowe, not Jurrion Dickey. So Jurrion have to have a big spring in order to jump up and take a spot that was already given to a guy a season ago. Or maybe he's someone who takes Malik Benson's spot. Maybe Benson is like, just okay, which is fine. And then Jurrion Dickey realizes the full potential that everybody saw in him coming out of high school. But I think your first four in some form or fashion, there can be some mixing and matching, but I think you've got Stewart, Benson, Bryant, and Lowe as your first four, and then Jeremiah McClellan, DeCorian Moore, Jurrion Dickey, and Kyler Casper is your second four. Now, what I have said about DeCorian Moore for a while is still something I believe. I think that he starts the year as a rotational guy, and by the end of the season, maybe even sooner than that, he could take somebody's spot. That could be Justice Lowe. That could be Gary Bryant. That could be Malik Benson. The only guy I don't think he can just leap past is Evan Stewart, who's an NFL caliber wideout, as we all know. So that's who I expect to start. But let me know who you guys expect to start in the secondary, always, or in the receiver room, rather. Always curious. Go first four, second four. Couple of non-freshmen that I'm watching most heavily going into the spring game, Jeremiah McClellan and Kyler Casper. So McClellan was a guy, along with Dickey, by the way, who was first off the bench last year when Oregon would get into garbage time, in games like Michigan State or UCLA. Like, McClellan was usually there as a true freshman. That's a pretty impressive feat and makes me think, yeah, he's probably a guy they feel is kind of next in line to be one of Oregon's core wide receivers. I don't think he'll be that this year, barring one or maybe even two injuries would be needed for that to be the case. But Kyler Casper is someone who I think has on paper, based on what we know right now, a greater chance to have a role than Jurrion Dickey, because that's just what we saw last year. When Casper was healthy, he got hurt and then missed, I think, well over half the season or so. He wasn't going to be a primary receiver, but he had a role. He had that big catch in the Idaho game for a first down, and then he was in goal line packages in the Oregon State game, and I think UCLA, and then got hurt around the midway point of the season, and we never saw him after that. So I think those two guys are players who, based on what we've seen in the past, I'd expect to have a sizable role if they're fully healthy, unless there's been some fluctuation on the depth chart this spring. So I think that's what makes this position group so incredibly interesting. And there are a lot of groups like this. I feel pretty good about those first four being the guys, and that's an incredibly veteran bunch. Gary Bryant Jr. is going into his sixth year of college football. He was a 2020 recruit, so he had a COVID year, and then he redshirted at USC. And Malik Benson, I believe it was 2 years of JUCO ball, which would make this his fifth year of college football. And this is Evan Stewart's fourth year of college football. And this is Justice Lowe's fourth year of college football, his second in which he's really playing. So a lot of experience in that room, which is another reason, the young guys are intriguing, but I think they have to do a ton to move past the seniors on the depth chart here. But I think this is an embarrassment of riches of sorts for Oregon in the wide receiver room again, and that's just been the case for the last couple of years now. Oregon has Cooper Perry as a true freshman in there, 4-star out of the state of Arizona. Interesting prospect to be sure. The true freshman to monitor here is DeCorian Moore, of course, and he's probably, I can almost guarantee you, a little bit of foreshadowing here for my everydayers, there will be a show next week. In all likelihood, it could be Friday, Thursday, I don't know. It's going to happen. The first segment will be titled, DeCorian Moore is the most exciting player to watch going into Oregon spring game. Because he is. He just flat out is. I don't think there's any way this guy doesn't have a role in some capacity this year. I don't think he breaks out Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams style. I think that's a 2026 ordeal, but I expect him to have 500 to 700 yards receiving and a handful of touchdowns as well. So overall, just because I don't quite know what the rotations are going to look like, or I'm not 100% certain about what the starters are or who the starters are going to be, I give this room a B+, which is still a very, very high grade. Very, very high grade. And this might get bumped up, especially if DeCorian starts popping. But going into the spring game next week, yeah, I'd say B+. Because remember, I'm a tough grader. C is average. I gave the tight end room a C+, and I think they're solid. I think they've got some solid depth. They have some questions there, to be sure. Kenyon Sadiq is elite, but the wide receiver room, I give them a B+ right now, and that's subject to change depending on what we see in the spring game on April 26th, but that's why they play the game, so that, we can see something, of course. Make sure you get to Autzen on Saturday, April 26th. Pack the place. Just pack it. Just do it. And I've got a message for Dana Altman. When I said I've got a message for Dana Altman, I didn't mean anything nefarious for our fearless leader of a basketball coach. What I meant is go get Andrej Stojakvic. This should be the number one priority without question. Without question for Oregon in the transfer portal. So Andrej Stojakvic, and not just because he's the son of Peja Stojakvic, who I have fond memories of watching play on the Chris Paul, David West-led Hornets back in the day with Emeka Okafor at center. Don't know who the shooting guard was. Stojakvic was small forward. Anyway, I remember those days. I know he had some time with the Kings as well. It's his son. We're old. Let's all just deal with it and move on. This is the perfect addition. This is what Oregon needs. Right now, my excitement level for Oregon basketball is tempered. It's just kind of like, okay. It's okay. We're still waiting on Nate Biddle. That's I just thought of an interesting question. Would I rather have Andrej Stojakvic or Nate Biddle? Probably Nate Biddle. Yeah, Nate Biddle, but it's close. It's like 1A, 1B. So Stojakvic played this past season at Cal. After beginning his career at Stanford, he was recruited by a number of schools, including Oregon, when he came out in the class of 2023. He had a solid first year with the Cardinal. Then he went to Cal this past season with Mark Madsen, who's a really good coach. But now he's in the transfer portal. 6'7", highly rated recruit coming out of high school, 18 points a game last year, 2 years of eligibility left. Sign me up right now. Right now. There are two reasons that this is perfect. Number one, Oregon did not have a consistent, long-scoring presence on the wing last year. TJ Bamba was solid. He's 6'5", Stojakvic 6'7", but I wouldn't describe Bamba as fully consistent since he wasn't even able to consistently shoot the three ball. And Stojakvic is a solid three-point shooter, kind of that 31 to 32, maybe 33% range over his first couple of seasons, like in that sort of realm, which is solid. But last year is an 18-point a game score, and he was playing in the ACC because, Cal, great ACC school down there in the Bay Area. But hey, that's where we are right now. So having a wing presence like Stojakvic would be phenomenal. Absolutely, positively phenomenal. That's reason number one. Is you're trying to replace TJ Bamba's scoring by the numbers. You have not done that yet. That has not happened, which leads me into point number two. What this Oregon transfer portal class has been missing is a proven Power 4 contributor. They have brought in some really intriguing guys. You have Devon Pryor from Texas, who last year averaged 3 points per game and didn't redshirt, I don't believe, his first year, but could get an extra year of eligibility if he wanted to. Still, 2 years left. He's 6'7", athletic, decent three-point shooter, could be lethal in the mid-range, super athlete, getting to the rim. Then they brought in TK Simpkins, who was an all-Colonial Athletic Conference selection at Elon. As I said, in the Colonial Athletic Conference. So is that proven production? At the low major level, yes. But in the Big Ten, we have no idea. And I've compared him just statistically to Raheem Moss, who this past year averaged less than 2 points a game for Oregon and was kind of a spot player off the bench for the Ducks. You need those sorts of guys who will go in and, just play some solid defense and score a bucket every now and then, but really they're in there to just spell some guys, play hard defensively, and not make any major mistakes. He was a first-team All-MAC selection, 15.5 points a game. So that's why I don't put all my eggs in the Simpkins basket, thinking to myself, yeah, he's someone who's going to come in and, well, he was 16 points a game last year. Certainly he's going to be 10, 12 a game this year. Maybe Moss could have been more if Oregon hadn't brought in TJ Bamba, they brought in TJ Bamba for a reason. He's a significantly better player. So I think those two guys, who were the first two additions, are intriguing, solid. They grade as good transfers on 24/7 Sports. I don't have the highest of expectations because I just don't know. I know that Simpkins played 2 games against Power 4 schools, Power 5 schools. This is college basketball, Power 5. Notre Dame and North Carolina, he had a couple of good outings. That's great. It is different when you are playing a Big Ten team week in, 2 Big Ten teams week in and week out from the beginning of January to the beginning of March. That is a different level of required production. And then they brought in Miles Goodman, the forward/center from Penn State, who's 6'10", 6'11", 225, 230, intriguing physical prospect. Again, less than 2 points per game, totaled 1 block last season, has never played more. This was his true freshman season last year with the Nittany Lions. He never totaled more than 16 minutes per game. So those guys, I understand why they have been brought in. Totally get it. Totally get it. Nothing about them is proven. So the idea of bringing in Stojakvic, who they have a previous relationship with, who they would have played against a couple of years ago in the Pac-12, RIP, whilst at Stanford. And I don't think that's a coincidence, by the way, that TJ Bamba and Brandon Angel came in. And yeah, these guys are from all over the place, but Bamba and Angel, the more impactful transfers, were guys who came from schools Dana Altman had coached against over the last several years. Angel had been at Stanford for 4 years. Bamba was at Villanova, but was at Washington State before that. So I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that connection makes a lot of sense. And it just makes a lot of logical sense. When you've seen a guy play live, you know exactly what he's capable of, even more than if you study a guy's film. It's always different in person, right? And so last year, Bamba and Angel were the impact transfers. Who were the lower impact transfers? Raheem Moss from the MAC, Akron, Ohio, and Supreme Cook from Georgetown, other side of the country. They had a role to play. Oregon's got to replace that role. I think Goodman is kind of in that Supreme Cook role. I think Simpkins is maybe going into that Raheem Moss role, potentially. We'll see. And I think Devon Pryor is kind of your Bam Tracy replacement. And we'll see what happens with Des Lindsey, who was injured last year. But a proven guy like Stojakvic would be insert into starting lineup right here, right now. Done deal. No questions. No debate. Nothing. Just like when they brought Bamba in. I was kind of on the fence about, will it be Raheem Moss, or is Des Lindsey going to play a role, or is Mookie Cook going to play, or what's going to happen? Oh, they brought in TJ Bamba. Oh, okay, yep. This would be a TJ Bamba level move, except his production and scoring has actually been greater than what Bamba's was previously. But I thought Bamba was a good player, really found his role by the end of the season, and helped propel Oregon to the round of 32 for a second straight year. Assuming you get Nate Biddle back, and that's assuming because nothing has happened, nothing has transpired. It's been all quiet on the Nate Biddle front for the last couple of weeks now. This should be your top priority. This is a perfect fit everywhere you look. He's long, he can shoot, he can score. He was in the ACC and played very well. That's all I need to know. And then you're just trying to figure out the shooting guard position. Because if you bring Biddle back, that's an if. Your starting 5 would be Biddle, KJ Evans, Jackson Shellstad, Andrej Stojakvic. And we'll see what happens to the 2 guard spot. Remember, this transfer portal window for basketball and the timeline at which they add players goes well beyond football. Could go as far into June. We'll just have to wait and see. But priority number 1 for Dana Altman, in my view, is Andrej Stojakvic. Go get him, Dana. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a great weekend and a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.